The restaurant was the kind of place my parents adored, a temple of hushed tones and starched white tablecloths where the clinking of silverware sounded like delicate bells. It was a place designed for celebration, and tonight, the subject of celebration was my sister, Sophia, as always. She was seated in the center, naturally, the coveted spot at the round table that made her the undeniable axis around which our family conversation would spin. My father, beaming, sat to her right, and my mother, looking at her with an expression of sheer adoration, to her left. I was seated opposite her, a spectator watching the play unfold from the cheap seats. Sophia was recounting the story of her latest promotion. It was a good story, full of the kind of charming anecdotes and self-deprecating humor that made her successes seem both inevitable and effortless. She had a glow about her, the easy confidence of someone whose path had always been paved with approval and encouragement. My parents hung on her every word. And then, can you believe it, Mr. Abernathy himself walked into my office, she said, her hands gesturing gracefully, a delicate gold bracelet sliding down her wrist. He told me the board had been unanimous. Of course they were, darling, my mother said, reaching out to pat her hand. They'd be fools not to see your talent. My father nodded in agreement, raising his water glass as if for a toast. That's my girl. Never had a doubt. Never. I took a slow sip of my own water, the ice cube clicking against the glass. I was used to this. For as long as I could remember, I was Olivia, the quiet one, the observer. Sophia was the star. She was the one who got the lead in the school plays, the one who was elected class president, the one whose report cards were framed. I was the one who held her purse when she went on stage, the one who helped her write her campaign speeches, the one who proofread her essays. I had always existed in her shadow, a supporting role in the grand production of her life, and for the most part, I had accepted it. It was simply the way things were. I loved my sister. I truly did. But love is a complex thing. It can exist alongside a quiet, persistent ache, a feeling of being perpetually unseen. Tonight, that ache was a little louder than usual. I had news of my own, a small, fragile bud of a success I'd been nurturing for months. I had sold my first painting to a local gallery. It wasn't a major sale, not by any means, but it was everything to me. It was a validation, a whisper of a promise that my own dreams, the ones I worked on in the quiet of my small studio apartment, were not entirely foolish. I had tried to mention it in the car on the way here, but the conversation had immediately been swallowed by Sophia's impending promotion. So I kept it tucked away, a secret treasure in my pocket. Just as my father was launching into a speech about the importance of ambition, a tall, impeccably dressed waiter approached our table. He moved with a silent efficiency that spoke of years of experience in high-end dining. I expected him to turn to my father, the patriarch, or perhaps even Sophia, the guest of honor. It was the natural order of things. But he didn't. His gaze swept past them and landed directly on me. He held a heavy leather-bound wine list in his hand. With a small, respectful nod, he stepped forward and placed it gently on the table in front of me. "For your consideration," he said, his voice a low, professional murmur. A strange silence fell over the table. My father's mouth hung open mid-sentence. My mother blinked, confused. Sophia's perfect smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. All three of them stared, first at the wine list lying in front of me, then at the waiter, and finally, at me. I was just as stunned as they were. My heart gave a surprised little flutter, a bird startled from its nest. In a family dynamic as rigidly defined as ours, this small, unexpected gesture felt like a tectonic shift. I, the invisible daughter, had just been handed the power to choose. For a moment, I just stared at the wine list. It was bound in dark green leather with the restaurant's name embossed in gold. It felt heavy, substantial, a book of secrets waiting to be opened. My first instinct was to push it away, to slide it across the table toward my father. It was his role, his territory. He was the one who would make a show of scanning the pages, clearing his throat and ordering a familiar, expensive red he knew nothing about, but had been told was a safe bet. Handing it back to the established order of things would be easy. It would smooth over the ripple that had just disturbed the placid surface of our family dinner. But I didn't. Something held me back. It was the waiter's eyes. He hadn't just made a mistake. There was a quiet deliberation in his gesture. He had looked at our table, at the loud, performative center and the quiet, observant periphery, and he had made a choice. He had seen me. Whether he saw a connoisseur, a decision-maker, or simply someone being overlooked, I didn't know. But he had seen me, and in that moment that felt like a lifeline. My mother cleared her throat. "Oh, there must be a misunderstanding," she said, offering the waiter a tight, apologetic smile. "My husband usually handles the wine." My father straightened his tie, a gesture of reasserting his authority. "That's right," he said, his voice a little too loud. "Just pass it over here, Olivia." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, wrapped in the guise of family habit. All eyes were on me. Sophia watched with a curious, unreadable expression, her head tilted slightly. This was a deviation from the script she knew so well, and she seemed intrigued by the improvisation. I looked down at the leather-bound list again. This was more than just about wine. It was about a lifetime of being the supporting character. It was about the painting I'd sold, the news of which was still a secret, held tight in my chest. It was about the countless times I had deferred, stepped back, and made myself smaller to let my sister's light shine brighter. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my hands on the cover. The leather was cool and smooth beneath my fingertips. I drew the list toward me and opened it. The silence that followed was even more profound. It was a silence filled with unspoken questions. I could feel my father's irritation radiating across the table, my mother's anxious fidgeting. I ignored them. I focused on the pages in front of me, a long list of regions and vintages I knew surprisingly well. While Sophia had been collecting accolades, I had been collecting hobbies, quiet passions that I pursued for my own pleasure. One of them was wine. I'd taken a course a few years back, fascinated by the history and the science of it, the way a single bottle could hold the story of a specific place and a specific year. It was a world I had explored on my own, for my own. My eyes scanned the pages, past the predictable Cabernets and Merlots my father always chose. I was looking for something specific, a memory from a book I had read. I found it in the section for Italian reds, a Valpolicella. Not the most expensive on the list, not by a long shot, but it was a winemaker I admired, known for producing elegant, thoughtful wines. It felt right. I closed the menu. I looked up and caught the waiter's eye as he stood patiently a short distance away. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and approached. "Have you decided?" he asked, his question directed solely at me. "Yes," I said, and my voice was clearer and steadier than I expected. "We'll have the Masi Costasera Amarone. The 2018, please." My father's jaw tightened. He had never heard of it. I knew he was about to intervene, to question my choice, perhaps to override it with something he recognized. But the waiter simply smiled. "An excellent choice," he said, with what sounded like genuine approval. "I'll bring that right out." And then he was gone, leaving another stunned silence in his wake. My mother looked at my father, who was looking at me with a mixture of disbelief and something else I couldn't quite decipher. Annoyance? Yes, but there was a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes too. Sophia, however, was smiling now. It wasn't her usual dazzling, center-of-attention smile. It was a smaller, more genuine smile, one I hadn't seen in a long time. It was a smile that said, well, look at you." For the first time all evening, the spotlight, small and uncertain as it was, had shifted, and I found that it wasn't nearly as terrifying as I had imagined. It was, in fact, surprisingly warm. The waiter returned with the reverence of a librarian handling a rare first edition. He presented the bottle to me, turning it just so, allowing me to confirm the label. I nodded, and the ritual began. The pop of the cork was a soft, satisfying sound that seemed to punctuate the tension in the air. He poured a small amount into a glass and placed it before me, not my father. This second gesture, this follow-through on his initial assumption of my authority, was even more significant than the first. It cemented the role I had tentatively stepped into. I lifted the glass, swirling the deep garnet-colored liquid. I wasn't performing. I was genuinely curious. The aroma rose to meet me, rich notes of baked cherries, plum, and a hint of dark chocolate. It was exactly as I'd hoped. I took a small sip, letting the wine coat my tongue. It was complex and velvety, a beautiful, well-structured wine that told a story. It was perfect. I looked at the waiter and smiled, a real smile this time. "It's wonderful, thank you. I'm so pleased you think so," he replied, and then proceeded to serve the rest of the table. My father watched my every move, his brow furrowed. When the waiter filled his glass, he picked it up immediately, took a large, unceremonious gulp, and set it down with a thud. He smacked his lips. "It's fine," he declared, as if his pronouncement was the final verdict that mine had merely anticipated. "A bit unusual, but fine." My mother took a more delicate sip. "Oh, it's quite strong, isn't it?" she said. Her default reaction to any wine that wasn't a light, sweet white, but Sophia was different. She watched me, then she mirrored me. She swirled the wine in her glass, leaned in to smell it, and took a thoughtful sip. Her eyes widened slightly. "Wow, Liv," she said, her voice soft with surprise. "That's actually incredible. Where did you learn about wine?" The question hung in the air, a genuine inquiry into a part of my life she knew nothing about. It was a door opening, just a crack. I felt a surge of courage, fueled by the wine and the unexpected validation. "I took a class a while ago," I said simply. "I found it interesting." "Interesting?" she repeated, taking another sip. "This is more than interesting. It's delicious." She looked at me over the rim of her glass, a new respect in her gaze. "What other secrets have you been keeping, Olivia?" And there it was. The perfect opening, the one I hadn't dared to create for myself but had been handed to me, just like the wine list. The little bud of news I had been protecting felt ready to bloom. I took a deep breath. "Actually," I began, my voice a little shaky at first, "I do have some news. It's not a big deal, not like your promotion, Soph, but—" I hesitated. "What is it?" Sophia prompted, leaning forward. My father stopped swirling his wine and looked at me. My mother paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. I had their undivided attention. The entire table, once a stage for Sophia, had become my audience. I sold a painting," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "The one I've been working on for the last few months. The big canvas with the city street in the rain. A gallery downtown bought it this morning." The silence that descended was different from the earlier ones. It wasn't tense or awkward. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. My parents stared at me as if I'd just announced I was moving to the moon. They knew I painted, of course. They called it my little hobby. It was what I did in my spare time while Sophia was out conquering the world. The idea that this hobby could produce something of actual value, something a stranger would pay money for, was a concept so foreign it seemed to short-circuit their brains. My mother was the first to speak. "You sold a painting?" she asked, her voice thin with disbelief. "For money?" "Well, yes," I said, a small laugh escaping me. "That's generally what sold means." My father set his glass down. He looked from me to my mother and back again. "A gallery? A real gallery?" "Yes, Dad, a real gallery." But it was Sophia's reaction that I was watching for. She put her glass down, and her perfect, polished facade seemed to crumble for a moment. Her mouth was slightly open, and her eyes were searching mine, filled with a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't immediately name. It wasn't envy. It wasn't dismissiveness. It was something closer to awe. "A painting," she whispered, almost to herself. "My sister, the artist." She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I felt like she was truly seeing me, Olivia. Not the quiet shadow, not the supporting act, but a person with a life and passions and successes all her own. My father was the one to finally break the spell of shock. He cleared his throat, picking up his newly refilled wine glass. "Well now," he boomed, a little too loudly. "An artist in the family! Who knew?" He tried for a jovial tone, but his eyes were still doing a complicated dance of recalculation. He looked at me as if a familiar piece of furniture had suddenly announced it could speak. "So, this gallery? They paid you for it?" "That's how it works, Dad," I said, a newfound confidence coloring my words. "And we can go see it?" my mother asked, her voice alight with a novel kind of excitement. It wasn't the proud, polished excitement she had for Sophia's predictable achievements. This was more like wonder, like discovering a hidden room in a house you've lived in for 30 years. "Of course," I said. "It'll be part of their winter collection showcase." But it was Sophia I was focused on. She was still looking at me, her expression soft and contemplative. "Why didn't you tell us, Liv?" she asked, and there was no accusation in her voice, only genuine curiosity. "When you called this morning, you just said you had a good day. You didn't mention this." I shrugged, feeling a warmth spread through my chest from the wine and the honesty. "I don't know. I tried to bring it up in the car, but everyone was so excited about your promotion. I guess I didn't want my little news to get lost in the shuffle." The words, once spoken, hung in the air with undeniable weight. "Get lost?" Sophia repeated softly. A flicker of understanding, and perhaps a touch of shame crossed her features. She looked at our parents, then back at me. "It never would have gotten lost, Olivia. I would have wanted to know. I'm proud of you." It was the way she said it, not as a platitude, but as a quiet, dawning realization that struck me to my core. "I'm proud of you." I had heard those words directed at Sophia my entire life. I had never, not once, heard them directed at me with such sincerity. The arrival of our main courses broke the intensity of the moment. But as we ate, something had irrevocably shifted. The conversation was no longer a monologue. My father, after making a few more comments about the surprisingly good wine, began asking me questions about my painting process. "So you use oils then? Not those watercolor things?" he asked, genuinely trying to grasp the details of my world. My mother wanted to know the name of the gallery owner and whether he was nice. And Sophia. Sophia was a revelation. She asked about my inspiration, about the colors I used, about how it felt to finish a piece. She listened, truly listened, in a way she hadn't since we were children, before the world had crowned her the victor in a competition I never even knew we were supposed to be in. I found myself talking more than I had at any family dinner in recent memory. I spoke about my little studio, the way the light came in during the afternoon, the frustration of a blank canvas, and the unmatched joy of bringing an image from your mind into the world. As I spoke, I saw my family through a new lens. My parents, whose adoration for Sophia had so often felt like a slight to me, were not malicious. They were simply people who celebrated what was easy to understand: promotions, titles, clear-cut victories. My art, my quiet, solitary passion, had been an unknown language to them. Tonight, I was finally teaching them the words. And Sophia, my brilliant, dazzling sister, looked at me not with pity or condescension, but with a dawning respect that felt more valuable than any prize. Finally, after dessert had been cleared and coffee had been served, the evening began to wind down. A comfortable shared warmth had settled over the table, a stark contrast to the formal, tense atmosphere we had started with. And then I saw him, the waiter. He was approaching our table holding the small black leather folder that contained the bill, a final unspoken test. I saw my father instinctively sit up straighter, his hand hovering near his jacket pocket where his wallet resided. This was the final act of the evening's performance, the man of the house settling the account. It was a role he had played for decades. The waiter moved with his signature grace. He glided past Sophia. He approached my father's side of the table. My father began to reach for the folder, but the waiter didn't stop. With a motion so smooth it was almost poetic, he continued his orbit around our table, bypassing my father completely. He came to a stop beside me. He placed the black folder on the white tablecloth, directly in front of me, next to my empty coffee cup. He didn't offer a pen. He didn't say a word. He simply gave one last small, knowing nod and retreated, leaving the final decision of the night resting, quite literally, in my hands. The black leather folder sat on the table like a judge's final gavel. It was a simple object, yet it held the entire weight of the evening's transformation. Once again, a profound silence enveloped our table. My father's hand, which had been reaching for his wallet, froze mid-air. He looked at the bill, then at me, then back at the bill. A flush crept up his neck. It wasn't anger this time. It was a deep, unsettling confusion. The established rules of his world had been broken, not once, but 3 times, by the same quiet observer. The waiter had not just made a mistake. He had written a new set of rules for our family, and he had cast me as the protagonist. My mother fidgeted with her napkin, her eyes darting between my father and me. "Oh, for goodness sake," she whispered, a nervous tremor in her voice. "This waiter is just determined to be difficult." She was trying to frame it as an error, an anomaly, to restore the familiar order she found so comforting. But Sophia knew better. She was watching me, a slow smile spreading across her face. It was a smile of pure delight, as if she were watching the finale of a thrilling movie and was rooting for the heroine. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a silent signal of encouragement. "Go on," it seemed to say. "Finish it." My father finally found his voice. "Olivia, just pass that over here," he said. His tone strained. He was trying to reclaim his role, to put the world back on its proper axis. "Let's not make a scene." For a moment, the old Olivia surfaced. The one who smoothed things over, the one who avoided confrontation, the one who would rather fade into the wallpaper than cause a ripple. It would be so easy to slide the folder across the table, to let him pay, to let the evening end with the illusion that everything was as it had always been. But everything wasn't as it had always been. I was not the same person who had walked into this restaurant 2 hours ago. I had chosen the wine. I had shared my success. I had been seen and heard and respected. I had a story to tell, a painting that was worth something to someone, a voice that was steady and clear. I opened the folder. The total was printed in neat, unassuming figures at the bottom of a long list of items. I looked at it, registered the number, and felt no fear. I reached into my purse and pulled out my own wallet. It wasn't a gesture of defiance against my father. It was a statement of fact for myself. I was a woman who could buy her family dinner. I was an artist. I was no longer a shadow. My parents watched in stunned silence as I took out my credit card and placed it into the folder. I closed it and placed it at the edge of the table for the waiter to collect. I didn't look at anyone. I simply took a sip of my cooling coffee, my heart beating a calm, steady rhythm. The waiter, who had been observing from a discreet distance, swooped in, collected the folder, and disappeared as silently as he had arrived. "Olivia," my father started, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," I said, finally looking at him. I gave him a soft, reassuring smile. "I wanted to. Let's call it a celebration." "A celebration of your painting," Sophia added, her voice full of warmth. She reached across the table, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, she took my hand. Her hand was warm, and her grip was firm. "I'm so happy for you, Liv." Tears pricked my eyes. "Thank you, Soph." The walk out of the restaurant was different. We didn't walk in our usual formation, my parents flanking Sophia, with me trailing a few steps behind. We walked together. I walked beside Sophia, our arms brushing occasionally. My father held the door open for all of us, and as I passed, he put a hand gently on my shoulder. "Good wine, Olivia," he said, his voice quiet and gruff with emotion. Really, it was a good choice. The drive home was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with the evening's revelations. When we pulled up to my small apartment building, Sophia got out of the car with me. "I'll walk you to the door," she said. As we stood in the hallway, under the dim fluorescent light, she looked at me. "You know," she began, "I think I've been so focused on my own path. I forgot to look over and see how beautifully you were paving your own. Your painting, it's not little news, Liv. It's the whole world. And I can't wait to see it." She gave me a hug, a real one, not the quick, polite embrace we usually shared. It was a hug that said, "I see you. I love you. I am proud of you." As I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I looked around my small living space, at the canvases leaning against the wall, at the faint smell of turpentine that always lingered in the air. It wasn't a shadowland. It was my kingdom. That night, one thoughtful waiter didn't just hand me a wine list. He handed me a permission slip to be myself, to take up space, to own my story. He saw a quiet woman at a loud table and made a simple, radical choice, to treat her as if she mattered. And in doing so, he reminded me that we all have a choice. We can accept the roles we are given, or we can pick up the menu and write a new story for ourselves.